I bet you won't guess which of these handsome guys is mine. That blonde one? Or maybe the one who looks like Timothy Chalamet? Wrong. I'm dating this gray-haired professor with an old folder under his arm. Well, at least that's what everyone at my college thinks. Hi, I'm Mary. It all began when I went to London to visit my cousins. We hadn't seen each other in 10 years. We used to be friends when we were kids, and I was sure that wouldn't have changed. And I was right. Kate, Nancy, and Dina almost squeezed me to death when I walked into their house. Over dinner, I told them that I was studying to become an architect, dating the coolest guy in college called Charlie, and constantly going to parties with my friends. Well, okay. I lied about the friends part. For some reason, I never got along with girls. Everything else was true. My cousins were delighted that I had such a cool and full life and suggested we go celebrate the reunion in a karaoke bar. We had a great time, but I never would have thought they would drag me to parties every day. To be honest, I'd rather have stayed home. But they wanted to party, and I decided to play along, especially since I knew I wouldn't have to endure it for long. The week flew by, and it was time for me to go home. I packed my bag, started looking for my ID, but then I heard my cousins shout in the living room. I ran downstairs and, oh no, the girl's puppy Jack had torn my ID to shreds. All that was left was an awful photo of me. Now I couldn't fly home to Washington. That meant I wouldn't return to college by the beginning of the school year. It was horrible. I always put studying first. I was an excellent student, and the last thing in the world I wanted was to miss classes. I panicked, called my dean, and explained the situation. Luckily, he came up with a solution. I'll talk to my friend from the London branch of our college. You can study there until you get your documents back. I was over the moon. The London branch turned out to be just as good as ours, and I could also study with my cousins. On the first day of my studies, they gave me a tour of the college and introduced me to my new classmates. I loved listening to them during the first seminar, but Dina ruined everything. While presenting her project, she made a gross mistake. Strangely enough, neither the teacher nor the students noticed anything. I had to step in. I raised my hand and corrected Dina in front of everyone, but instead of thanking me, for some reason, she looked at me angrily, and my other cousins did as well. After the seminar, they explained what the matter was. Mary, how could you do that? You set me up. But I just wanted to help. After all, no one noticed your mistake and would have memorized incorrect information. Just don't do that again. Nobody likes know-it-alls. It was very weird. In Washington, I often corrected my classmates and even teachers, and no one said anything. But the rules in London seemed to be different. I promised to follow them, but since I would be stuck there for quite a while, I decided to change my cousins' lives a bit as well. I started with nutrition. The whole week that I had been staying with them, we only ate fast food. That evening, the girls bought some nasty stuff for dinner again. I decided to prepare a pleasant surprise for them. I threw those greasy bags into the trash and cooked a normal meal for us. When they came down for dinner, a salad abundant with vitamins, steamed fish, and banana pancakes were waiting for them on the table. The girls frowned for some reason. Why did you throw away the burgers? Mary, eat whatever you want, but don't touch our food anymore. Got it? I laughed and pinched Nancy's leg. You'll have cellulite if you keep eating such food. They got offended and went to their rooms. But why? I was telling the truth and just wanted to get them hooked on proper nutrition. I carefully put the food in their lunchboxes, pasted stickers with their names on top, and put them in the refrigerator. I was sure the girls would take their lunches with them to college in the morning. They didn't even touch them. Fortunately, in class, Kate, Nancy, and Dina forgot they had been angry with me the day before. We chatted about all sorts of things as usual while we waited for the last lecture. But our teacher, Mrs. Wilson, came into the classroom and announced that there would be no lecture that day, and we could go home as long as the dean didn't see us. For some reason, everyone was terribly happy and left even before I'd even finished shoving the textbooks into my bag. Mrs. Wilson and I were left alone in the classroom, but she was so busy she didn't even notice me. She put red lipstick on and poured half a bottle of expensive perfume on herself. When I passed by her table, I saw that she was picking an evening dress in an online store. I couldn't believe my eyes. The teacher had canceled our class for some date? The dean should be aware of what was going on in the college behind his back, so I went to him and told him everything. After that, I was sure that Mrs. Wilson would include an additional lecture in our schedule to make up for it. But the next day, another teacher came into the class instead of her. Mr. Evans said that Mrs. Wilson had quit because of an unpleasant incident, and now he would teach us instead. At that moment, for some reason, Mr. Evans looked at me contemptuously. Do you think it was all in my head? Well, it wasn't. From that day on, all the other teachers looked at me the same way. During the seminars, I got the most difficult topics. The teachers clearly disliked me. Only one of them always smiled at me and helped, an elderly professor, Mr. Brown. I'd mentioned him at the beginning of my story, but the students weren't as kind to him as he was to them. My sisters convinced the other students to deceive the professor and write in the test papers that we had already presented our essays. We hadn't, but Mr. Brown had memory issues, so he did not suspect anything and started to explain a new topic like nothing had happened. I was furious. How could they mock an elderly person like that? During a break, I came up to the professor and told him everything. He was so grateful he passed me and promised not to go easy on the others. Everyone was terribly angry at me, even my cousins. But wouldn't you have done the same? After all, it was only fair. My classmates clearly did not think so. When I came to college the next day, everyone was looking at me and whispering to each other. It was very unpleasant. I didn't understand what was going on until I accidentally heard some boys talking. Are you serious? This new girl and Mr. Brown, you're having me on. Sure, but why else would he go easy on her? Besides, her sister said so and they would know. What was going on? Were my sisters spreading rumors about me and Mr. Brown? No, I couldn't believe such nonsense and decided to talk to them. But everything I'd heard turned out to be true. Maybe they just envied me because I was smarter. We would never have done this if you had acted like a normal person. But it's like you're from another planet. You set everyone up and you aren't even ashamed of it. I burst into tears, stormed out of college, and ran home. I didn't know anyone in the city except my cousins, and they acted like I was some sort of monster. I collapsed onto the bed and burst into tears. After hearing my loud sobs, Aunt Joan came running and asked what was wrong. I was so upset, I told her about everything her daughters had done. My aunt got very angry. As soon as the girls came back home, she loudly scolded them. As a punishment, my aunt took away Kate, Nancy, and Dina's pocket money. I didn't leave my room all day so as not to cross paths with my cousins. The next morning, we went to college separately for the first time. In class, they acted like we were strangers, but that wasn't the worst part. When I got home, I saw my suitcase on the porch. I broke out in a cold sweat. Would they really kick me out? The doorbell didn't work, so I started banging on the door like crazy. My cousins eventually opened it, looking annoyed. Kate handed me a small stack of money. This is the last of our savings. It should be enough to rent a hotel room. Take it and get lost. Stop ruining our lives. In any other situation, I would have turned around and walked away proudly. But I was alone in a foreign country, and had spent almost all my savings during the first week of living in London, so I had no other choice. I took the money from Kate and rented a room at the nearest hotel. The only thing I wanted at that moment was to get my ID as soon as possible and get home to Charlie. He always found the right words to say. I decided to call him so that he would console me. Charlie didn't answer for a long time, and when he did, I saw that he was doing no better than me. Charlie was lying on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, sniffling and coughing constantly. He said he had caught some kind of virus and was now stuck at home. Even in that state, he found the strength to comfort me and told me how much he missed me. But at the end of our talk, it turned out that it was all a lie. A girl in a swimsuit ran into Charlie's room with a cocktail in her hands. Hey, why are you lying down here? Let's go to the pool. Everyone's waiting for you. Charlie grimaced and waved his hands, but it was too late. My boyfriend had pretended to be sick so that I wouldn't see how great he was doing without me. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say, and stupidly stared at the screen. Charlie broke the silence. Well, you see how it is now. I'm sorry, but you're so stuffy. I've been trying to break up with you for a long time, but kept putting it off. But now seems to be the right moment. I slammed my laptop shut and burst into tears. Everyone had betrayed me. Was I really that insufferable? I spent the whole day lying on the bed in the room and came up with the only way to get sad thoughts out of my head. The next day, I came up to Mr. Brown and asked him to keep me busy with assignments. He praised me for my inquisitiveness and opened his computer to find something for me to do. We both stared at the screen, but then something distracted us. A notification from a messenger popped up in the corner of his screen. Mr. Brown received a message from my dean in Washington. Unfortunately, I managed to read what was written there. My dean was asking when that annoying Mary would come home and boasted about how easy life was without me there. That was the last straw for me. I jumped up from my seat and ran towards the door, but Mr. Brown asked me to stay. He wanted to tell me something. When I was young, I was just like you. I thought that everyone around me was wrong and I had to help them, but nothing good came of it. My wife left me, my daughter did not want to talk to me for a long time, and all my friends and colleagues turned their backs on me. That's when I realized that the whole time, I had been the one at fault. I spent a lot of effort to change and stop meddling in other people's affairs. And you know, after that, things got better. It's never too late to change, Mary. I thanked Mr. Brown for his advice and went back to the hotel. As soon as I walked into my room, I got a notification that my ID was ready. But even that didn't make me happy anymore after everything that had happened. I packed my things, went to get my ID, and bought a plane ticket. I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye. After all, my aunt and cousins had taken me in and endured my whims for a long time. Besides, I was sure that the girls missed me and had already regretted having kicked out their cousins 100 times. I couldn't have been more wrong. When I got to their house, I saw the whole Parker family in the backyard. My sisters were playing Monopoly with their parents, drinking tea and laughing. They must have been celebrating getting rid of such a bore as me. I got a taxi and left London a few hours later. The Mary that returned to Washington wasn't the same as the one who'd left it. During the flight, I decided to change my life so as not to repeat the fate of Mr. Brown. At that moment, I couldn't even imagine how much effort it would take. I put an elastic band on my wrist to hit myself with it every time I had trouble minding my own business. After just one day, my hand turned really red. It took at least a month before I learned to act differently without such drastic measures. Congratulate me on my first successes. I didn't do anything when my classmates decided to play paintball instead of going to a boring lecture. And I didn't even say anything when Charlie stole the test answers from our dean's office. And you know what? Life has become much easier for me. My classmates noticed that I had changed and started inviting me to their parties. Charlie apologized for dumping me over the internet and suggested we have coffee sometimes. Even the dean became more welcoming and recently invited me to speak at a landscape design forum. I decided how stupid I had acted before and apologized to my cousins over the phone. Long story short, my life was gradually getting better, but I still didn't have any real friends. So when my birthday came, I decided to celebrate it at home with my parents and wasn't expecting any guests. However, as soon as my mom brought out the cake, the doorbell rang. My cousins were standing behind the door with flowers, gifts, and balloons. I had been wrong. I had real friends. That day, Nancy, Kate, and Dina and I made up and promised to come visit each other as often as possible. Do you have cousins? Tell us in the comments down below, whether you get along or not.